So it's raining outside today, so it's a good day to do another video here. Thought I'd do a video today to show you guys on some potential damage that can occur to your aircraft during startup. And it just takes a second or so, one little loss of concentration, and you can do about $8,000 to $9,000, maybe 10, maybe more, damage to the engine and engine assemblies on your aircraft if you don't pay attention during the startup. And what I'm speaking of is when you start the air, and this is true whether it's a Raven 1 or a Raven 2, where people will start the aircraft with the throttle opened on there. Most of us grew up riding motorcycles, and we're used to rolling the throttle towards you to increase the throttle. And in a helicopter, as you all know, you roll the throttle away from you to increase the throttle and towards you to decrease the throttle. So if you have a new student, this is particularly important for flight instructors, because you want to really watch new students. Because unfortunately, when they have the throttle in the wrong position, it's typically all the way open, and that's not a great way to start the aircraft. You can damage several components, and I'm going to show you pictures of those damaged components that we've replaced on aircraft here in just a second. But if you're a flight instructor, your most important thing is to make sure that during the startup that you reach your left hand over there and hold that throttle down while they're doing the startup. Don't let them try to milk the throttle and roll it during the startup. That can produce damage as well, and we'll talk more about it here in just a second. But you want to make sure that throttle is completely closed during the startup. And it doesn't matter whether it's a 1 or a 2. You can do the same thing with a 2. If you have the throttle roll up during the startup, the engine will accelerate quickly, and it'll spin that big fan on the back, the cooling fan, which is made out of steel. And it fits down over the end of a shaft. I'll show you a picture of one that's damaged here. And because it's so heavy, if you were to rapidly accelerate, the engine, when a helicopter, when it starts, is under no load at all, basically. It's just like starting your car. If you were to hold the accelerator all the way to the floor and start your car, you're in for a big surprise when it lights off. So it's kind of the same thing with the helicopter. If the student has the throttle cracked at all, and a lot of times it'll be all the way full open because especially if they have low hours, they don't realize that you roll the throttle toward you, or they may have slipped their memory, whatever, and they may have the throttle rolled all the way open. And believe me, that's going to do some damage. As soon as they hit the start button, you're off to the races. So again, as a flight instructor, your most important thing is to make sure that throttle is rolled down. There's really almost nothing else a student can do during a startup that can damage the aircraft. They may leave the mixture out and it won't start. In the case of a Raven 2, they may flood it and it won't start, or may be difficult to start. And but really there's almost nothing else that they can do during the startup to produce a significant amount of damage, or any damage, to the aircraft. But this is one of them. So, all right, I'm going to take you guys over here and I'll show you the components that we're talking about here. Okay, so we're back here in the shop. I'm going to point the camera down through here so you can see. Okay, so you see the cooling fan on the back of the engine here. It's got a castellated nut there with a piece of safety wire that goes right through the center of it. And you'll notice that, during your pre-flight inspection, what you want to do is look at and make sure those two white lines there that are drawn on the cooling fan, that the safety wire is lined up with those two white lines, so that you know that nobody has spun the fan on the shaft. The reason that's important is it's a heavy item. It's a balance item. We have to balance it. If you notice, you'll look and see the small bolts that have washers on them. They go around the kind of the periphery of the fan, and there's about I don't know, 16 of them or whatever. And if you notice, there's a different size washer on one of the bolts, and that's how we balance it. We change the size of the washers or the number of washers on the cooling fan, and that's how we balance the fan to make sure that it's in balance. It's very important. It's a very heavy item. It has to be balanced. If the thing's not balanced correctly and it goes for quite some time, you can actually produce cracking of the frame and that sort of thing. So it's important that this thing be balanced and in the right position here. Okay, I'm going to crawl under the aircraft here and show you kind of how the back end of the clutch assembly and drivetrain is assembled. If you look in here, so here's the engine. This is looking towards the front of the aircraft. There's the starter, there's the engine. All right, the end of the crankshaft is actually located behind here that you can't really see.
So on the end of the crankshaft comes the flywheel, is put on first, and then the sheave assembly, which some people call a pulley, is right here, and it bolts on to the it's next in line, so to speak, past the flywheel. And then here you can see part of that flywheel bearing and housing assembly, or lower sheave bearing and housing here. And I'm going to show you the actual part that's off of an aircraft that shows the damage to it. That comes on next, and then within the cooling fan shroud here is the cooling fan on the back side of this. That's the back of the aircraft. That's the front of the aircraft. All right. Okay, so let's go take a look at that component now.
Okay, so we're back in the office again. I brought the fan wheel shaft and bearing assembly in here just because the lighting's a little better. We'll take a look at it here. So again, this is the assembly that we were looking at under the aircraft. This is the section that bolts together with the two clutch assemblies, or the clutch assembly rather, comes together to push the two sheaves apart to tighten the drive belts. Well, this section right here, you can notice that this shaft is tapered here on the end. And if we rotate the shaft around here, you can see all of this damage that occurred when the fan was spun on this shaft. Produces a lot of galling to the surface of the tapered section of the shaft there. And so that has to be replaced. You're really unlucky if it does the same thing to the inside of the hub, the fan wheel assembly that rides on there. There's a hub that is tapered as well, and it fits down on top of this shaft, the tapered shaft. And occasionally, not only will the shaft here, the tapered part of the shaft, be damaged, but also the tapered hub on the cooling fan, or the flywheel assembly, or flywheel cooling fan assembly, can be damaged itself. And that hub is pretty pricey as well. This assembly here, this whole thing costs about $4,700. The inner part of the hub on the cooling fan is about $600 to $700 by the time you pay shipping on it and get it here. So it's about $5,400 for those two components. They have to be replaced. And on the issue of the fan, the hub itself is replaced, not the entire fan, but again, pretty pricey. It's about well, I think $612 for the hub plus shipping. So okay, so that's a very common occurrence. People will start the aircraft with the throttle partially opened or all the way open, and produce some significant damage to the aircraft. If the throttle is rolled all the way open and they start it, the damage can be much worse to the engine. I mean, you throw a rod, you start replacing jugs and pistons and rods, and it gets very, very expensive. Sometimes up, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage potentially, instead of just $7,000 or $8,000 or $9,000, whatever. So if you get lucky and you just have to replace the shaft assembly, $4,600, $4,700 in parts. Unfortunately, it costs about $1,000 in labor to disassemble the whole thing and put it back on. Parts don't assemble themselves, or reassemble or reinstall themselves. So it's going to cost you about $1,000 in labor. So, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $6,000 worth of damage. If you damage the hub on the cooling fan, it's another $1,000 or so to replace that. Another thing that you ought to really consider doing, if you're having to tear the whole butt end of the helicopter off to repair it when this happens, you should almost always replace, number one, the alternator belt, which only costs about 25 bucks. And you should really consider replacing the crankshaft seal, because you've got it all disassembled. It's relatively easy to do at this point now. It's just the cost of the seal, which is, I don't remember exactly what they cost, $30, $40, whatever. And an extra hour, say hour and a half, to put the shaft, since you got it all disassembled, to put the crankshaft seal in and the alternator belt on. You're only spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $150, $200 more, and to prevent you from having to disassemble the thing if you lose either the alternator belt or the crankshaft seal starts leaking again, you're talking about $1,000 worth of labor to take the thing apart and put it back together. So might be well to spend that extra $150 or $200 and save yourself a lot of trouble and a lot of money if in the long run. So all right, well, I hope you guys got something out of this. Now again, this is most important for flight instructors. However, I'll just tell you that we have had several people, owners with a fair amount of flight time on, that have done this to their aircraft as well. And in those cases, a lot of times it's where they'll be actually rolling the throttle trying to get the thing to start, and man, when it lights off, it zings up, and you know, it's a done deal. And again, the same thing can happen in a Raven too. If somebody has the throttle even partially cracked and they light that thing off, you can spin the cooling fan on the shaft and produce the damage. So okay, well, hope you guys got something out of that, and please like and subscribe. And I think the next video I'm going to do is on how to start a Raven 2. A lot of people have problems with Raven 2 starting them, and we'll cover that in the next video. So stay tuned.